All right, welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review Part 7, and this is session 53. We're talking about those golden calves that Jeroboam set up there. They were supposed to be representative of the Lord God, but he was working in a way that God did not tell him to do it. And I was trying to make the point for us today that look, just as it was for him, it is important for us that we learn to do things God's way. When you get up into the creature and when you get to the heavenly places, it is not enough to be able to look at something and go, oh, I know a way that can get done. We need to know, we need to know how to think about that the way our Father thinks about it, and then we need to engage in that the way He would engage in that. Does everybody see how that makes sense? See, I think it does. I think that makes perfect sense. Okay, so now, let's see. So we're talking about that in 2 Kings. Now, let me take you to Exodus 32. Now, this is about the golden calf when they came out of Egypt. And I want you to notice. And he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool after he had made it a golden calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, Tomorrow is a feast to Ashtaroth. No. Tomorrow is a feast to Molech. No. Tomorrow is a feast to who? To the Lord. For these people, now look, we'll just continue to read it and then we'll talk about it. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. But they did it to what? They did it to that calf. You remember what the Lord would say in the law? Thou shalt make unto thee any graven image. That is exactly what they did. They were not doing it God's way. Now look, I'm not making an excuse for them, but they thought Moses was gone. They didn't know what had happened. They kind of lost their way. They wanted something. And you know what? Instead of stopping and thinking, what is the way God would want us to do it? They just formulated a way to do it. And of course, now, since we're back here in Exodus, where in the world did they get the idea to make a golden calf? Now, they were doing it supposedly to say, this is about the Lord. But where did they get that idea? That came out of the worship of Baal. That's where that came from. That was common in that pagan religion. So they took an aspect of the heathens, the Gentiles' worship of a false god, and they brought it in and thought they would make it part of the worship of the true God. It's a feast day unto the Lord. That's not a feast day to Baal or Baal. It's not a feast day to him. It was a feast day to the Lord. Hey, did Aaron know which God brought them out of Egypt? Sure he did. And so when they do this, you know what? It's as though they were all sitting around. It's as though they were all sitting around and they were thinking, what are we going to do since Moses is gone? And someone says, well, you know what? Here's what those Baalites did. They made a golden calf and they made an altar and they sacrificed to their God that way. Why don't we make a golden calf and we'll sacrifice to the Lord that way? Look, I'm not trying to just find an opportunity to be ugly about other people's religions, but you know what? When Catholicism has gone into places in this world where there has been all kinds of the occult and the demonic, instead of rejecting the occult, all they did was add those occult practices to Catholicism. So what you find is the same thing happening here. They began to add occult practices into their worship of the one true God. But you know what God knows about that? When you do that, you know what's eventually going to happen? What is eventually going to happen? You're no longer going to be worshiping the one true God. That is going to turn into idolatry. And it's going to turn into the worship of a false god. And He knows that. Remember when He told them, when you go into the land, don't make a treaty, don't make an alliance, don't intermarry, don't let your sons marry their daughters, and don't let your daughters marry their men. Why? He said, because they will lead them so that their hearts move away from God, and they'll become, worshipers of these false gods. God knew what the end of that would be. This is the same kind of issue. Don't use the symbols of a false religion and integrate it into the worship of the one true God. That's not going to work. It's not doing it the way God told them to do it. Okay, so anyway, I'm just saying all of that to say, that's who Jeroboam was. Now, and so what did they do? They did two things. They feared the Lord, and they made of the lowest of themselves high priest, and they sacrificed in high places. You know what? They thought those high places would serve, and God would be looking at that and go, yeah, that's good for me. That works for me. But it does not work for Him. All right, now I want to go back to this line of Kings, and I want to show you something that's very interesting. So, this is God's response to that. I'm sorry, I forgot about this. And the Lord said unto Moses, go get thee down, for thy people, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt. This is what He's talking to Moses when he's up on Mount Sinai. They have corrupted themselves. And then look what He says. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I have commanded them. They weren't doing things God's way. They've turned aside out of the way. And then He says, they have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, these be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Israel. Huh? Egypt, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't do that one on purpose. That was an accident. Yeah. So, brought you up out of the land of Israel. Okay, I'm writing a whole new Bible here. Okay. So, I brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So that's what they were doing there. All right, now, let's get ourselves back to this line of kings, because this is where Hosea comes in. So in 930 years before Christ, you have Jeroboam. He's going to reign for 22 years. Then you're going to have a guy named Nadab. He comes in for 2 years. And then you have a guy named Baasha. He's in there for 24 years. Here's the interesting thing about Baasha, is that he leads the whole northern kingdom up here to engage in idol worship. He really entrenches them in that. Then you got the short reign of Elah, which is 2 years. Then you got an even short, and by the way, he continues the idol worship, of Baasha. He just continues that. An even shorter reign now, Zimri, he's there for 7 days. After Zimri, then comes Tibni, he's there for 4 years. And then Omri. Omri is there for 12 years, and this guy these are all evil kings. The Scripture says they all did evil in the sight of the Lord. But Omri is a guy who especially gets Israel entrenched into idolatry. The next guy is Ahab. Anybody remember anything notorious about Ahab? He's the one that marries Jezebel. So, and of course, they are worshipers of Baal. That's the big thing with Ahab. Ahaziah comes along for 2 years after Ahab. And then Jehu. I missed Joram. I did. In between there, I should have Joram. And is it in your notes? Joram comes along for 12 years. And let me tell you, anybody know who Joram is? He's the son of Jezebel. So you know what he's like mother, like son in that particular case. All right. And so then Jehu comes along for 28 years. And by the way, God kind of raises Jehu up. He doesn't consistently follow the Lord, but he's a lot better than some of those that have come before him. If you were going to say that the northern kingdom ever had a good king, this is probably as close as they ever get. But he does not consistently follow the Lord. But let me tell you what he does do. He does put Joram to death. And guess who else he kills? His mother, Jezebel. Remember, has her thrown down from the wall. And then there's a king in Judah, Ahaziah, who is also evil, who kind of collaborated all along. God has him put him to death too. So he's kind of an instrument that God raised up to do that. Then you have...
Jehu kin to Jezebel?
Jehu did, yes.
No, but is he kin to her?
No. No, it's a different family. Yeah. So then you got... well, I missed another one. Jehoahaz should have been in the middle there. Do you have Jehoahaz on your notes? All right, and I think he's 17 years. All right. So you have Jehoahaz. He comes along there. He worshipped a false goddess called Asherah. And he gets idol worship started up for that. And then you have Jehoash, which reigns for 16 years. And then, this is where we wanted to get to. Then you have Jeroboam, and we're calling him the second. Why? Because the first king was called Jeroboam, but you have another guy that comes along now named Jeroboam, and he is going to reign for 41 years. And he is very evil before the Lord. He is evil on steroids, this guy. It is at the end of his reign. Now, Jeroboam is the first king, but now you're going to come along. Let's do Jeroboam the second. It's at the end of his reign that Hosea is going to start his ministry. And so following that guy is going to be, so there he is. Let's just start him off fresh, because this is now the ministry of Hosea. Then you got a guy named Zechariah who comes in for just 6 months. Then you got Shallum, which comes in for 1 month. And then you got Menahem, which comes in for 10 years. And by the way, there's something very interesting about Menahem. Let me tell you. Under him, the northern kingdom financially does pretty well. But this guy, I mean, as far as what's going on in the nation, but this guy really oppresses the people and taxes them heavily. And then you have Pekahiah for 2 years. That guy continues the idol worship. And then you have a guy named Pekah who comes along for 8 years. And it is during his reign that they are taken captive to Assyria. Now,
these are all bad guys.
These are all bad guys. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not in your notes, so let me just tell you a little side deal here. I told you there's one guy that God raised him up to put those evil ones to death, but he didn't really follow the Lord, really. There's not one righteous king in the northern kingdom. It starts off badly with golden calves and a false priesthood and altars and all of that. It turns into idolatry very rapidly. They're doing all kinds of abominable things up there. How many tribes are up here? 10. The people who are really desirous of the Lord God and that are righteous, I should have put some verses in here about it, but it's one of those things I know about that I thought it'd just be a rabbit trail. But everybody that was really righteous and really wanted to serve the Lord, when they saw these calves go in and this false priesthood and all of that, they migrated down to the southern kingdom. And really what you have left up there is a bunch of people who are really pretty open to idolatry and all that kind of business. They do what they want to do. They don't care if they don't follow the Lord or not. And so they come down here to the southern kingdom, which is probably why this kingdom runs another 125 years before it finally goes south, so to speak. and is carried away captive. Now let's read about this in 2 Kings, because I want you to see the timeline here. 2 Kings 15:23. In the 50th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekahiah, the son of Menahem, began to reign over Israel and Samaria and reigned 2 years. If you look at your chart, you'll see that's right. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. That's the first Jeroboam. He's the one that caused Israel to start all that off. But Pekah, the son of Remaliah, a captain of his, conspired against him and smote him in Samaria in the palace of the king's house with Argob and Ariah, and with him 50 men of the Gileadites. And he killed the king, and reigned in his room. And the rest of the acts of Pekahiah and all that he did, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. In the 52nd year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekah, remember the guy that killed him there, the son of Remaliah, began to reign over Israel in Samaria, and reigned 20 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. In the days of Pekah of Israel came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ejon, and Abel-Beth-Maachah, and Genoa, and Kadesh, and Hazor, and Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. See, that's the last of the Israel kings. And then, you do have after Pekah. Now, by the way, when Assyria takes them captive, they do carry, you see, they carry a bunch of them away. But do they carry everyone away right then? The answer is no. They come in and that's a lot of areas, by the way. When you just look at all of that, when you look at that, look, Galilee, you know where that is. That's up in the northern part of Israel. They're taking big swaths of Israel, taking them away captive, and then you know what they do? They install another guy to be king. And you know what they make him? A vassal. He's going to be a servant to Assyria. And they're going to demand payment every year in gold and silver from this king. So it's his job to get it raised from the people that are left in Israel. Now that was going on during the days of Pekah, but it really, even though he carries all those people away, they don't lessen the amount of tribute. Because they're looking at it and they're saying, we didn't carry everybody away, you need to come up with the same amount. So here's what you have. Now you have a guy named Hoshea who's installed, and he's in there for 9 years. A lot of heavy taxation by the Assyrians. Finally, one day, the ruler of Assyria goes, you know what, I'm tired of fooling with that kingdom of Israel down there. I'm just going to go down there and take it. And so here we are in 722. That is the end of the northern kingdom, and Shalmaneser takes them all the way captive to Assyria. And the northern part of Israel is vacated because he has cleaned them out. So, 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. You see what's happening there? He's paying tribute. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt. Can I just give you a little background here? At that time, Egypt is the only power that is equal to Assyria. So you know what he's doing? He's making overtures to Egypt saying, hey, you can help us out against Assyria and we'll pay you tribute. We just don't want to be under the Assyrians. And it says, he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and look, and brought no present to the king of Assyria as he had done year by year. See, every year he's bringing in that tribute and present to the king of Assyria. Now he decides, I'm not doing that. I'm sending guys to Egypt, see if I can get myself out of this. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Hala and Habor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. Now, at that time, the Medes were under the dominion of the Assyrians, and so they didn't just... So you know what you have? The Bible's right. It says they were scattered among the nations because Assyria had control of a lot of places. They just took the children of Israel and they just kind of scattered them out there. And that's a very interesting thing because we'll see a verse about that in just a moment. All right. And so, here's what you have now. In 715... Hezekiah is going to begin his 29-year reign in Judah. This is not the northern kingdom, this is Judah. Why am I telling you? Because that means 7 years after Israel is carried away now into Assyria, now you've got this king, Hezekiah, who's coming along, and he's the king in Jerusalem down here in the southern kingdom. Why is that important? Look at Hosea chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord that came unto Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of, and he's going to talk about the southern kingdom kings, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. What did I just tell you? Hezekiah doesn't even start ruling until 7 years after this northern kingdom is taken away captive. So he's in the days of Uzziah, all the way back there, all the way to Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and now he's going to give you a reference to the northern kingdom. In the days of Jeroboam, not the son of Nebat, but the son of Joash, king of Israel, northern kingdom. So what did we have here? You have Jeroboam, who is the first king, but now you have, remember we saw this Jeroboam who reigned for 41 years. We called him Jeroboam the second. Why? Not to confuse him, because the other guy is 127 years earlier. It's not that Jeroboam. So it's that second Jeroboam. So if he's there during the days of Jeroboam, and he's there all the way to the days of Hezekiah in Judah, that's where you're going to get these numbers. He's there for 29 years before Israel is carried away. Israel is carried away captive. And his total ministry is going to be there for 50 years because he goes all the way beyond the start of the rule of Hezekiah. So he starts in the days of Jeroboam in Israel, and he's going to end in the days of Hezekiah in Judah. That's a big span of years. Okay, so that's the time background for Hosea. So we kind of know who he is. Now, here's the thing. I was telling you this. Hosea is one of the minor prophets. And in fact, he's the first, in line in your scripture, he's the first of those minor prophets. There are 12 minor prophets. In your book, it starts with Hosea and it ends with Malachi. But if you were holding in your hands a Hebrew Bible, there would be not 12 books finishing up the Old Testament. There would be one. One book. And it would contain Hosea to Malachi. And in the Hebrew Bible, it's not called Hosea or Malachi or Amos or Joel or any of those others. It's called the 12. That's the name of that book. So when someone says, well, the Hebrew Bible doesn't have as many books as we do in our Bible, well, that's because they took those 12 and they put them together into one book. And they just called it the 12. But all 12 are in there, just so that you know. Anyway, it's kind of an interesting thing. Now let me give you a brief outline of Hosea. It's real quick. First of all, Who is Hosea prophesying to? He is prophesying to the northern kingdom of Israel. I'll just talk to you about that. And here it is. In the first 7 chapters of Hosea, here's what's in the focus here. Israel's sin is intolerable because God is holy. And in chapters 8 through 10, Israel will be punished because God is just. But here's the one where Paul is going to quote from, because he is going to quote now. He's actually going to quote from, well, we'll see it in just a moment. But this is what Paul is going to be after. Israel will be restored because God is love. And that's in chapters 11 to 14. And what you're going to find in Hosea is this theme over and over again where God is going to say, I'm going to judge you, but I'm going to restore you. I'm going to carry you away captive, but I'm going to bring you back. You know what? My anger is with you, but I still love you. And you're going to see this recurring theme, and there it is overall in the book of Hosea. Now let's take a look at the background of Hosea's ministry so we'll have a context for this, because we're going to get to Paul's quote. It's in Hosea chapter 1 and verse 9 when Paul quotes this over in Romans chapter 9. So here it is, Hosea 1:2. The beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea, and the Lord said to Hosea, Go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with this. What God commands Hosea to do is to go marry a prostitute. His marriage to this prostitute, who is named Gomer, and the children that they have are very instrumental in showing us Israel's history. It does show how evil the nation was and how unfaithful they were to the Lord and how they rebelled against Him. But it also shows that God's love for them is absolutely constant. Even when He has to chasten them, even when He has to punish them, even when He judges them, His heart is always toward them. And I'm going to show you something. Even though it is God's wrath, when He scatters them right here, He still loves them. So, verse 3. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. And the Lord said unto him, Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. I put this in there, which is the threat of the 5th course of punishment. Cause to cease. Do you see that? Cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. It's talking about the Assyrian captivity. And it shall come to pass at that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Now, it doesn't seem like it when we read this, but this is about to be very interesting. Because of the names of these children. There's 3 kids, there's 3 names, and those names have to do with the progressive response of God to the northern kingdom of Israel. And that's the message that Hosea is going to give to them. It's in verse 9 that Paul quotes something. But to get the impact of what's happening in verse 9, we're going to have to know, at least understand the things that are happening leading up to that. It won't take us long to do that. But we need to understand those kids, what their names are, and what those names mean. Because then when Paul quotes that thing in verse 9, we'll understand why Paul is quoting that to answer the question, is God finished with Israel forever? And he is going to say, the answer is no, and here's how you know it. No. Hosea 1:9 does not talk about an interruption of a dispensation of grace. But Paul is going to quote that to talk about the interruption of the dispensation of grace does not nullify this promise that God made to you in Hosea 1:9. So that's where that's going. Okay, so we'll stop here.